so pleased to welcome Bobby Hambrick. He's the founder and CEO of AutonomouStuff. Again, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the background there, but this is a great company that was recently acquired by, oh my gosh, I just forgot the name, Hexagon. And we'll talk a little bit about that, Bobby. Thanks for joining us here. And I know you know Michael, the co-founder and CEO of Torc Robotics. You guys have known each other for some time, and I know been in conversation. And then I'm very pleased also to welcome Kristin Kolodge. Kristin presented at last year's Silicon Valley Reinvents the Wheel. She works with J.D. Power and Associates, and in her role there, does a lot of work with, again, the consumer's attitude towards all of these wonderful topics that we're talking about. And with that, I'd like to start with you, Kristin, if you want to go a little bit deeper on some of the things that you are working on, and then let's talk about some recent results.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having me today. Really pleasure to be here. So at JD Power, we're focused on the voice of the customer. So as we're thinking about these new mobility solutions, we've been step in step just looking at what do the consumers think about these new options. So it's ranging from automated vehicles, talking about level 4, level 5. We're looking at battery electric vehicles, and we're also looking at technology on the road today. So thinking about level 1 automation, level 2 automation, right, as a vehicle starting to take over more control. And so this is such an important piece to the conversation because we know that so much time, resources, investment is being spent on these new mobility solutions. It's important to understand if the consumer is ready and waiting for these technologies or where their hesitation is, because, you know, before these products hit the road, we have an opportunity to help shape those attitudes and get the consumers ready. So in short, at this point in time, you know, as we've been looking specifically at, you know, fully automated vehicles, so again, that level 4 or level 5 type of capability, we continue to see very steady levels of skepticism regarding this type of technology. So at this point in time, consumers are not trusting of the technology. They're not really sure why we're focusing on the technology. So even our message and our, you know, industry alignment regarding safety as a primary factor, the consumers are not necessarily connecting those same types of dots. And so all of this really further promotes the necessity for us to continue to outwardly educate why we're working on these types of technologies, what it means long-term, and certainly starting to provide some proof points.
I appreciate that. And I want to remind everyone also, and you can see the full bios on this great panel and all of our speakers on the website. And again, you have particular insight, Kristin. You have the background that you worked for nearly 2 decades at Fiat Chrysler. So both from, you know, studying the consumer's perspective and done a lot of work with HMI, the human machine interface, which I think is remarkable when we even see things rolling out right now. I think one of the previous panelists talked about the voice-activated heated seats, and I think we can all agree that that's one of the greatest options in any vehicle in the recent years. I do want to get back to some of your studies, Kristin, but moving ahead, Bobby, AutonomouStuff, again, it's a great name and well descriptive as you've built some of the platforms or helped build the platforms as we go forward. Let's get a quick background there too, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me again on the panel. It's great to be on the panel with the other gentleman and the lady as well. Michael and I have been in the business together for well over a decade, and so a lot of things have changed in the last decade. I've been in the business for nearly 15 years, traditionally enabling others towards autonomous driving. So somehow lowering that barrier of entry and expediting the chance to go into production and for various applications from mining to agriculture to automotive and so forth. So we're also well known for building a lot of the hundreds of the vehicle platforms that are used for autonomous driving applications. And then 2 years ago, we were acquired by Hexagon, which is a large company made of hundreds of companies. And that's just my small part of continuing to build out that ecosystem and do what we've always done, continue to lower that barrier of entry and try to get some of these autonomous applications on the road.
Great. Thank you again for being here. Michael, Torc, Robotics, as you mentioned, and Bobby mentioned you've known each other. Mm-hmm. And again, he talked a little bit about some of the commercialization. I know you guys are deeply engaged in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charlie, thanks for having me here today. I'm such a big proponent of bringing industry experts to panels to sort of educate, to help educate and inform the press and also the public. There's been a lot of great communication and I think miscommunication in this space over the last 10 and 15 years. So I think this is a great thing. This is a journey. Some folks will call me pioneer, but it makes me sound a little bit old. This is something I started working on with a handful of friends in grad school, probably about 15 years ago, participating in a lot of the DARPA challenges, building self-driving vehicles before the word self-driving was coined, putting self-driving vehicles on public roads before SAE had defined, the different levels of automation and level 4 and level 5 and so forth. We started Torc in 2005, focused on one thing, and that's the self-driving vehicle stack focused on level 4. So just to clarify, that basically means there is not a driver in the loop, that the vehicle is making all the decisions that a driver would, and there is no need for a human intervention. We've been a big believer in focusing on the business case first. So after we were one of the few teams to cross the finish line in the DARPA Urban Challenge, we quickly moved into to the mining space to remove our warfighters from being inside military vehicles and keeping them away from IED and roadside bombs. We're one of the few companies that have actually commercialized level 4 self-driving vehicles. So, demonstrations are on one point and actually bringing it to product is much more challenging. And then we moved to mining soon afterwards, where we partnered with Caterpillar to automate haul trucks. And today, there are fleets of self-driving haul trucks that are operating without anyone inside the cab day in and day out in Australia. And recently, about 14 months ago, we joined the Daimler family. So Daimler is the inventor of the combustion engine, the car, the inventor of the truck, and we joined the Daimler truck side of the family because we thought that trucking was the next big mover because of the strong business case. So one of the previous panelists sort of mentioned that Daimler should be concerned and where are they making their investments on the truck side of things, and I'm here to represent that investment.
I appreciate that. And again, thanks for joining the panel. Interesting thing about that is you're talking about mining, and this particular conference is about safety. So much of safety has been involved in an accident or a collision of some sort. But as you're pointing out in the mining world, it could just be the presence of the driver being in an environment that in and of itself is unsafe, and military also. So the safety comes from just having the ability to not have to have a driver involved with the vehicle's function. So appreciate that. Hey, Kristin, I'm not sure we covered exactly all of the studies that you have. I know you have a quarterly report that comes out. I'd like to talk to that, make sure everybody knows about that a little bit, but also wanted to ask you specifically, when you talk about consumer acceptance of this, you break it down by, several factors. I think age is one of them. And it was interesting hearing about Voyage rolling out into the elder communities. And I just wanted you to comment a little bit on what your studies might show on the acceptance of that.
Absolutely. So our quarterly report, it's called a Mobility Confidence Index. And so we've been deploying this study for nearly 2 years now. Our next report actually comes out next week. And so it's been...
insights you want to share?
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. But certainly we're excited to share those next week because we certainly were very tuned into what the COVID pandemic, how that might have shifted consumer mindset regarding the acceptance for automated vehicles. But, as we've been looking at this, trend over time, we were looking to see, how consumers' thoughts and acceptance and, willingness to ride in. And we were looking at several different types of automated vehicle services. So anything from delivery of goods, commercial, self-driving vehicles, riding in a personally owned vehicle, taxi, a self-driving Uber or Lyft type of vehicle, and looking at the different types of acceptance. And it has been extremely interesting to see how constant this acceptance is, and the acceptance is very low. So we measure this out of a 100-point index scale. And as we've been looking at this since the start of 2019, it has been in the mid-30s and really has only varied 1 point over the duration of that time. So it's been consistent, and this is, a sample of, in the United States, over 5,000 people that we go out and survey each time, and it's a different group of people. And just to see, for those that perform research, when you get such a consistency of results, how resounding that type of voice is. So again, it underscores the importance of us, recognizing that we have a ways to go with consumers to be able to communicate what the benefits of this self-driving type of mobility system is going to be in the future. Now, that being said, we're able to look at, as you mentioned, various types of demographic type of aspects. And, we see the traditional type of realm of the younger generations being more accepting of a self-driving type of technology. But, as you mentioned, with the previous speaker, we also see how much experience matters, as well as just someone who claims that they have a great deal of knowledge about self-driving vehicles. And those two elements certainly increase that level of acceptance and excitement regarding what self-driving can do. So to me, that just, further puts an exclamation point on that we have a malleable consumer population at this point in time. We have an opportunity to shift that conversation. So the more that we can get consumers to experience these types of technologies, we can quickly see that trust pendulum swing from a mistrust or a skepticism to a trusting type of situation, barring that they have a positive experience. And with that certainly comes the importance of experiencing those ADAS technologies that were talked about earlier in today's conference, right? So the level 1 and level 2 types of technologies, having a positive experience there is going to increase that level of acceptance for greater levels of automation. We see consumers already connecting the dots, right? If my vehicle can't maintain itself in a lane, how do I expect it to drive itself, right? So consumers are making those types of connections. So with this type of trending analysis, we definitely have some work to do as an industry, but I'm here to say that where that work has been done and where those consumers have experienced greater levels of automation and have had a positive experience, we're seeing that level of excitement regarding the technology.
So I know I've got your studies in front of me. I'm not going to go over all of them, obviously, but just a quick question, and I want to move on, is in terms of the question about it, is it all or none? Because so much of what we're talking about now is perhaps rolling out the technology in certain segments or geofence in certain areas. In other words, as you pointed out, wandering from my lane is not adding trust to the whole thing, but maybe there's opportunities delivering packages and things like that. Are you getting that granular in your questions?
We are, and we're looking at these different types of automation technologies that are on the road today, and we're seeing some positive benefits. Let's, just as a for instance, looking at active driving assistance or, active lane change assist, those types of technologies where they can act like a partner to the driver themselves. So where you get that type of relationship building experience where, essentially that extra set of eyes, that extra relief and stress, or just executing that driving task where you have a positive experience and where it's working in conjunction with how the driver thinks it should work. And that's certainly the tricky part to execute. Okay. That is where we're seeing the level of excitement coming from consumers and the appreciation for that type of technology.
Okay, I have a lot more questions, but I need to move. Bobby, we're talking about, bringing an AV onto the road. You guys have done such a great job in establishing a foundation for that. You're hearing from the consumer side. Do you get that kind of feedback from the people that you're working with? And can you comment on that?
Yeah, first I'll follow up on what Kristin was talking about. I actually went to a car dealership just this week, and I was asking them a lot about the technologies that were in the new vehicles. And to be honest, if I was a standard consumer, I would have been terrified on the way that he was explaining the technology to me. Yeah, to be honest, the salesperson had no idea what he was talking about when it came to adaptive cruise control and lane keeping and all these other technologies that were built into the car. So I do believe also, Kristin, that educating the not only the standard consumer, but also the companies that are trying to sell these vehicles and they have no idea what they're talking about. And I found myself training him and thinking about maybe a new career move for me maybe I need to be training these car dealerships on how this technology works. I'm not sure. But no, our customers are different. Most of our customers are engineers. They understand how complex these systems are. Not all of them, but most of them understand that. And again, our job has always been to try to help them get there faster by lowering that barrier of entry. And this is one of the largest engineering challenges of mankind, and we hear that over and over and over again. It's not easy, and it's a lot different from doing a demo, as Michael said, and going into real production, which he has a lot of experience in as well. And you can't do that alone. Like I've always said, you have to have a big ecosystem of players to pull together anything into production in automated vehicles, and it's no different now. The more serious you get, the harder it gets for automated driving.
Yeah, and then as far as going forward in that, and we'll this will be a nice transition to Michael afterwards also. But as Kristin already brought up, the different levels. I know that those were established many years ago. We talked about this being a somewhat, this event that we're having here has been around for many years. We've seen the eroding acceptance of all the levels as they originally identified. But hey, you know what? We're all evolving in terms of if and when this comes. Would you comment on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, it's every new technology goes through this thing called the hype curve, right? And we were absolutely in the hype curve through 2016, 17, 18, and everyone wanted to talk about the sexy thing, which was driving without a driver on downtown New York or whatever. And I think that did the entire industry a disservice. We jumped right to the end goal. In fact, that's not an easy thing to approach. It's the unmanned driving in urban scenarios is probably the last application that we should be focusing on, and trucking should have been the first one that we focused on, right? Or other low speed type applications. So I'll say that I think the confidence will build up as we readjust our expectations of what should be released in that way, at what time.
Yeah. Well, I saw when you said the word trucks, Michael got very excited about that. And I know Torc has been working on that. We talked about some of the off-road or non, traffic induced applications when you talk about mining. I'd welcome you to talk a little bit more on, and if there's other industries that you want to mention, but more specifically, let's talk about trucks and why trucks are so important, a good place to start. Please.
Sure. So at a high level, Torc has been operating self-driving vehicles on public roads since 2007. And that's in urban environments, and that's also in highway environments. So we have a tremendous amount of experience on what works and sort of what doesn't work. About 3 years ago, I came to the conclusion that the robotaxi business, which we were involved in, is much further out than most folks realize. And the complexity is, if you look at the consumer, it's convenience and cost where you can't compromise on the safety side of things. So the smaller that you make the geofenced area, okay, the easier the problem is technically. But from a convenience standpoint, if you can only go from one destination to the other destination, that's not very convenient. So from a robotaxi standpoint, you really have to expand that circle, okay? So we look at it a little bit differently on the trucking side of things. If we have a trucking operation, trucks are driving back and forth between one hub and another hub day after day after day. So that route is well defined, it's well known, and it's a highway or an interstate, which oftentimes is much more structured. So while it's a very challenging problem to do, it's much easier than sort of boiling the ocean with a self-driving robo-taxi from the East Coast to the West Coast. We've always been a big believer in sort of crawl, walk, run, okay? The second side to this, and let's shift to the business case, and we've actually seen a tectonic shift in the self-driving industry to focus more on trucks. And as Bobby mentioned earlier, maybe we should have been focusing on trucks, sooner rather than later. And one of the reasons we joined the Daimler family is we saw that. And it's great to be with the market share leader in trucking, because we believe that the only path to commercialization is through an OEM, because this is much more than just the software stack. The truck and the chassis has to be entirely reinvented. which I think it's kind of epic to have Daimler, the inventor and pioneer of the truck, joining forces with Torc, a pioneer in the self-driving industry. Okay, so now let's take a step back and talk about the strength in the business case. If I'm a passenger in a robo-taxi, I'm probably not going to take a ride at 4 a.m. in the morning. So utilization is pretty low. If you look at trucking, it doesn't really matter if you ship the goods in the afternoon or at 3 in the morning. The goods need to go from point A to point B. But one of the limiting factors that we have in trucking is, for safety reasons, good safety reasons, truck drivers are only allowed to operate a truck for so many hours a day. Okay, so that's where the utilization barrier is. And at the same time, there's a shortage of truck driver jobs, especially in long haul applications. So this is a way to sort of introduce technology to address a strong business case where there's a need to increase utilization, because I think we'll all agree that e-commerce is on its way up and brick mortar is sort of on its way down. And how do we focus on the consumer to make sure that we get goods to their destination cheaper and faster, and that we do it in a way that we make our roads a safer environment? And we think that trucking is the way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And again, commercialization, as you bring it up, in terms of utilization and costs and things like that, I think, again, as we all wished that 2020 rolled out with all of us having an autonomous vehicle in the driveway, that's a long way to go on that. Bobby, just a quick question on, I know that you guys have experimented with a lot of different platforms, and I'm not trying to pick or choose anyone, but can you talk about what platforms that you now know to be the best or most stable to build an autonomous vehicle off you? Mike, you made me think of that when Michael mentioned that the path to autonomous is through an OEM.
Yeah, and Michael's absolutely correct. If you want to deploy something, an automated driving application safely on public roads, you do have to reinvent the entire vehicle. The vehicles that exist today were not manufactured and designed to be autonomous driving in all applications in live traffic as reliably as they should be. That you have to have redundant actuation, and there's a long list of things that you have to make sure that you're putting something that's going to be safe and fail safe at all times in the application while it's driving automatically. The vehicles that we provide and the platforms we provide that operate in mining scenarios or agriculture scenarios or even on the road typically are used for automated driving research, meaning that we actually still rely on a driver behind the wheel. And again, we're not trying to deploy these commercially. We're just helping others prepare to deploy things commercially. On the other hand, we all are working on our own designs. And like Michael said, you have to reinvent yourselves completely. So when you're talking about by-wire interface, you have to have redundant actuation, redundant computing, redundant to everything, and you have to do it under certain standards in the way that you're actually writing the code and designing these systems. So I think for the most part, a lot of the OEMs have recognized this and they're working on it, but a lot of them still have a long ways to go, which is why a lot of consolidation and partnerships are happening in the industry, like Daimler and Torc and many others.
As I think about you and all of the different accoutrements that you're putting on the vehicles as you customize them for development and things, and even their features, I'm reminded of conversations, Kristin, you and I have had about what these features really are when you're talking about having the consumers trust or understand what this is, as you said, the trust pendulum to shift. I mean, even understanding what those are, and I know you did some work with AAA in terms of renaming or identifying the actual features or the capabilities. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we worked with AAA, Consumer Reports, National Safety Council to put out a document called Clearing the Confusion. Each of our organizations had seen this important concept of, what Bobby and Michael were mentioning earlier, how important it is to make sure that we're talking the same language with the consumer. I mean, when we look at adaptive cruise control, that type of technology, and when it goes by 20 different names in the industry at this point in today, same for lane departure warning, same for lane keeping. I mean, the complexity of just having a conversation about, are we even talking about the same technology? That was the driving factor behind, the importance of putting this putting this document together to start creating a naming convention that is standardized and utilized across the industry, so that we can look at, technically, what is it that the industry, or what is it that this technology is able to do, and making sure that we're talking about it in functionality types of terms, so that there isn't a confusion about what the driver, overstating what the capability of the vehicle is, for instance. We want to make sure that these are driver assist systems and not, taking over that driving task. And so a lot of this was, again, looking to clear the confusion, looking to make sure that we're not creating marketing hype that can, consumers can misunderstand the capabilities of these systems that might lead to dire consequences. So really, this had safety at the forefront. This certainly has the longevity. We know that we want consumers to have a very positive experience with these technologies. And part of that is making sure that we're level setting those expectations, right? That the consumer isn't disappointed because they thought the vehicle was going to be, let's say, a self-driving capability, when really it's a driver assistance technology. So we've gotten some really good traction out of this, and excited, this is a living document. We've already gone through a few different variations. We have had endorsement by the Department of Transportation, by SAE, by the PAVE organization. So really getting some good movement out of this type of document, and looking to continue to expand it as we have more technologies coming on board.
Okay, now if you're looking at the clock, it's indicating we're just about out of time. However, I have a good personal relationship with the host MC, and I can make us talk a little bit longer. I think we're going to do that because we will have the time. I want to remind everyone, if you are listening and paying attention, again, the hashtag is WSS2020. 2020. Michael, I want to go to you with what Kristin was just talking about, and again, moving the trust curve. I think the pendulum, so to speak. I think it's great what you guys are doing, off-road and mining and agriculture, developing. I think there'll be a great thing to talk about, and maybe offer some more trust as you're learning how to navigate, very complicated areas. But as you were talking about trucking, and let's just finish it. What's it going to take to put the trucks actually on the road? You talk about it being a relatively understood, route that they're taking, but there's obviously levels of complexity on that. How soon before we can see that implemented?
Sure, and just to clarify, Torc's been operating on public roads for since 2007, and Torc is focused on one thing right now, which is bringing self-driving trucks to market. So we have publicly said that within the next decade, we will have. We feel very confident that we'll have self-driving trucks, especially in hub-to-hub applications. When we look at what barriers we see in front of us, it's not one big barrier. It's actually a lot of different things. So earlier we mentioned that the truck chassis has to be reinvented. When we look at redundancy and even dual redundancy, and putting in sensors into the truck chassis to collect data and represent that data in a similar fashion to what a truck driver would feel. So that's at the lowest levels, okay? We also need to see some performance increases on the sensor side of things, mostly in range and resolution. The challenge in driving in highway and interstate applications is you're driving at a faster speed. As you drive at a faster speed, you need to be able to look out further and have a higher level of confidence that you're looking out further to detect and classify and also predict where these different objects are going to be in the future. And it's that prediction which is challenging, because how do you predict what people are going to do, where oftentimes people are unpredictable by nature? And you could also extend that into wildlife at the same time. Okay, now let's take it to another section, and it's sort of like what Kristin was talking about with trust. When we look at some of the problems that we're solving for, it's almost an infinite number of scenarios. Some of those scenarios you may never encounter, but the potential that that scenario could exist is there and must be addressed. So one, how do you go about solving for affinity in a safe fashion, which is still an open question. I mean, we have some concepts, we have some brilliant people working on this, but now let's shift a little bit. And I know I'm kind of peppering us with all these different challenges, because this is definitely, in my opinion, the most challenging technical problem of our generation, but trust. And to me, trust is an individual's confidence that some other object, including a self-driving vehicle, will do X and not Y. Okay, so as we create these different scenarios, and think about scenarios that you and I encounter, okay, and if I were to put 3 different scenarios up for the audience today and say, in scenario A, or scenario 1, should we do A, B, or C? Would we have 100% consensus that it should be A and not B and not C? That's one of the biggest challenges here. And I think that is one of the ways that we can start building trust, between the consumers and also the developers and manufacturers of self-driving vehicles. That will not be done overnight. That will be done in forums like this and education on best safety practices when it comes to driving. And self-driving is irrelevant to that discussion. I mean, I think you can have that discussion even if self-driving technology didn't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We just got a minute or so. I'm going to do a lightning round and start with you, Bobby. As we talk about what's going to take to get an AV on the road, what would a quick message you'd have from AutonomouStuff, just to answer that, if it's possible, in a sentence or two?
Yeah, I think that we shouldn't be in a hurry. It shouldn't be about the hype. It should be about deploying something safe. And if it's trucking, that's great. There's a great return commercially as well. If it's in ag or in mining, whatever we have to do to make sure we know what we're doing before we get it on the road is what we should do. And I agree with Michael. I think it's going to be a good decade, especially in scenarios where the public are involved, before we can safely deploy these. I mean, there are plenty of people that are trying to do it faster. There's 9 or 10 other trucking companies out there that are trying to deploy these automated driving applications, and Hexagon's working very hard on it as well. But as Michael said, you need to crawl, walk, and then run, even though we've been sprinting for the last 2 decades on working on it. But so I think that we all need to slow down, take a deep breath, and just make sure we do it right.
So you don't want to give an actual date and time. Got it.
No, I think that people who do that are putting themselves in a bad position to come back to. But I do think it's going to take, depending again on the application. If it's on road, we need to take our time. But if it's off road and we can control the scenarios and control the environment, that's a much different story, right? Just like we had talked about, we're deploying technology in autonomous mines today and have been for a while.
Yeah,
I like that. You're saying it's when it's safe. That's when you'll deploy. Completely agree with that, Bobby.
Kristin, quick closing comment.
I'll just say, the importance of integrating the consumer into this development process, right? They're going to be the end user, whether it's commercial trucking or a personal vehicle or riding in a self-driving taxi, they're going to be the end user. So we've got to make sure that they're coming along in the conversation, that they understand the proof points of why we're working on these mobility solutions, and certainly recognize that this is our opportunity to shift their mindset and bring them on board for the excitement that we have as an industry for what this mobility solution can bring.
Appreciate that. And follow up, we'll include a link to your studies for everyone if they choose to sign up for it. So I appreciate that. And then Michael, we can't get into it as much as I want to, but just a quick comment on and not only autonomous, but is platooning part of the picture? Can you comment on platooning? It's not easy. It's not quick, okay. Is it?
So I can make it very quick. Daimler, I believe 18 months ago, basically openly stated that they did not believe that platooning from a manually driven application, not full self-driving, did not create value for their customers. You may see some evolution of self-driving trucks working together to optimize cargo delivery. But we're staying pretty close-lipped about that right now.
Okay. Any other comments? We need to go.
Thanks again, Charlie.
Nothing but thanks for you guys. So much more to talk about. We look forward to following up in person.